Hello, viewers. Welcome to Drawing Comics Part 16. I'm your host. I'm going to be drawing Conan the Barbarian, the movie special. And I'm going to continue from where I left off yesterday, which is this panel right here. Conan is discovered by the cultist, and he is about to see the wrath of the cultist. As you can see on the next page, what they do, basically crucify him to a tree and wait for him to be eaten alive by these vultures. But to his luck, his friend is in sight, and soon enough, we'll find out what happens to Conan. I'm excited to start this new panel. And did some work yesterday. It turned out pretty good. There's some things here and there that could use a little bit of improvement, but for the most part, it's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the results, and I'm gonna be revisiting these panels. There might be a day where I just dedicate myself to penciling and inking rather than working on a new panel. Ooh, that didn't come out good. Hope your day's going good. Hope you guys are practicing for those who are interested in improving. I hope you're getting some good results, and if not, that's okay. It's just part of the process, and know that you're not working backwards. It's not like you are getting worse. You're always improving, even if the results aren't that great, or as you expect them. Know that you're just pouring in more into your skill each time you draw. And as you can see, even in these panels, even the greatest heroes face challenging moments and times. At least you're not being crucified onto a tree waiting for vultures to eat you alive, right? So if things might not be exactly coming out exactly as you plan on them to at the moment, you could think of that as a way to alleviate your frustration. Can draw these teeth right here, and this is the challenging part, actually, because if you draw the teeth wrong, whoa, it's a disaster. But notice that he did really fine lines for the detail. Like, he didn't use dark lines in any way, because then it starts to look like, you know, the person has gingivitis or whatever. So pay close attention to that detail. Thin lines. A common example of terrible work when it comes to teeth was this tattoo artist that did like a portrait of the guy's or the customer's wife on his arm, and you might have come across it on Instagram or other social media, but it turned out to be a disaster because the tattoo artist, first of all, wasn't great, and when it came down to like drawing the teeth, he didn't use it thin enough, I guess, thin enough needle. His technique wasn't really that good, and he ended up drawing like really dark lines in between all the teeth, and she just looked like a zombie from Night of the Living Dead. It was awful, and that's permanently on his arm. So lesson 1: don't draw lines in between the teeth really thick. Pay attention to it. And lesson 2: pay the tattoo artist well, or find one that is more pricey, but you'll know that they won't turn your wife into a zombie. I think the person was just like, yeah, I know this tattoo shop and it's cheap to get one. They went in there and turned their arm into a disaster. And I'm sure his wife wasn't thrilled either. So I'm starting out a new panel, and there's some things that I just want to help you guys as well if you're working on some panels. The best technique that I found that really helps improve your drawing or improve your reference drawing is studying the space between two objects. So for example, how wide is the space between the pillar? Right, I don't know if you could see right here, between the pillar and the frame. Pay attention to that, and pay attention to that as well in your drawing. And just basically draw the reference off of that. It helps to sketch things out quickly. Again, I'm using basic shapes to just have some structure, have something to work off of. Doesn't have to be detailed, but just enough to fill up the space. Have some sort of boundaries there. I'm paying attention over here. How close is the robe of the cultist, or the cult member rather, to the frame? And just pay attention to these little details to help you make sure that everything fits into the frame to get more of an accurate result. And then how close is his hair to the cultist, right? That's the next point of contact. Just gonna continue sketching lightly. This is something that I mentioned in a previous stream. The drawing process is very similar to the building process. You want to first lay down the beams before you start laying down bricks and before you start designing the interior. And the beams are basically just a quick sketch using simple lines to just give yourself some sort of framework, right? Similar to the structure. You want to make sure that you give yourself the right measurements to fit in everything that you want to do. The bricks, the walls, etc., that sort of thing. So the bricks being more of like the basic shapes that you start forming after you draw these quick lines to give yourself some parameter to work within. And then then you could start putting in the bricks. You could start using these basic shapes to build out the rest of the body or the figures. And then you could start designing the interior, which is like the details, right? Dividing rooms, adding in that sort of detail, the door frames, the doors, windows, that sort of thing. That's all the detail. If we're going to go back to comparing it to drawing, that's all the detail in a drawing as well. The muscles, the eyes and nose and all that other stuff, like that starts to come in after you lay down the beams, after you put in the bricks. Just give me a second, guys. I'm going to turn the AC on. It's getting kind of hot in here. Just wanted to share with you guys for a second the panel itself. I'm just taking a look and see how the layout is there and the kind of expression each figure has. And that kind of conveys the story, right? It tells the story, it gives a mood, yeah, it sets the tone in a sense. And you got this figure right here in this beaten up pose, right? And you got another one right here standing in a very like soldier-esque position with their hands behind their back. And all this adds to like the drama of the scene, to add a certain tone, to show like such a menacing environment. You know, you could even tell, even though there isn't that much detail in the eyes, just simple lines here and there, a little bit of the brow showing, the furrowing of the brow, and that's enough to actually put on this face expression on there. And I just find it to be so amazing because it's not zoomed in, you can't really see much, but just these simple lines right there, carefully placed and very conscious of like anatomy and position and angle to indicate that he's like looking down at Conan. Even the gesture in his hand, how he's holding it in like a fist form, adds to the sort of impression you get from the entire frame. In addition to this hulking guy behind him, you know, this is considered to be like this cultist leader, right? And then he has this figure that's a lot bigger than him, yet still protecting the leader himself. Adds to the scene as well. You know, just his face expression as well, his hands being folded. Like all this stuff is taken into account to convey a certain emotion, to convey some sort of like drama that's happening within this panel. And I think that's important, aside from just being able to draw the figure, from being able to draw the anatomy right. And there are other things that you have to keep in mind as well, which is the composition, right? You want to be able to tell the story in a way that's compelling. There's a difference between you as an artist and being able to draw all this and getting a kick out of it and enjoying it, and another thing when a viewer who isn't an artist reads the comics and is thrilled by something. So they're not thrilled by the same things as you are, which is more of like the process and the drawing and the outcome of it. They're thrilled by all those things at I believe like more of a superficial level. And I'm not going to say that across the board for all of them, but let's just say for most or majority, I would say, of people don't really pay attention to those things because they don't draw. So you want to be able to convey the mood and the story in ways that's not just compelling for an artist, but also compelling for your everyday reader. And these are just elements to keep in mind when creating the composition. Like, what's the mood? How can I create the scene that tells the story or tells or kind of describes the dialogue itself, right? Like, what is he actually trying to say to Conan, and what kind of like emotion is he trying to invoke? And just these elements kind of help. And you could see that in the background, the pillars, it's not going across straight, right? So to make it more of a dynamic scene with the background included, you could see that it's kind of angled. It's keeping it away from being a very boring kind of background scene or a boring shot in total. You want to add more of a dynamic vibe to it, and that's an excellent way to do it. You stay away from making these like really straight across lines, and that doesn't mean that you should always avoid it, but variation is important. You know, varying each panel, trying to come up with different ways of telling the speech bubbles within a panel, like describing the speech bubbles within a panel using all these different elements really helps to make it more interesting. And as you could see, the next panel, it zoomed in and you could see the cultist's face and his just like complete disconnect, this like almost sociopathic kind of expression, and considering in context. And then you have this guy in the background with these two snakes as the top of his helmet to create more of a dynamic transition from panel to panel. You know, you got this beautiful shot from top down looking at Conan and his gesture showing showing pain or showing helplessness in a sense. And then the cultist leader with his hands crossed, and then you got Conan's face expression showing alarm. So it's just being able to switch from panel to panel, make sure that it's not monotonous, that it's not boring shots, boring face expressions. There's a lot of emotion in each of these panels, starting from the first one, all the way down to the last. There's such dynamic representation in each panel. So I just wanted to take note of that. I wanted to share that observation with you guys. Maybe help you with your own comic book work or with your own scenes that you're creating. And that was the challenge that I actually enjoyed when I was creating comics from imagination. It was having to come up with really interesting ways to go from panel to panel, scene to scene. It wasn't just about drawing the characters and making sure that they would come out right. It was also just considering the story, how to tell the story visually and connect it with the dialogue as well. And that's a fun process as well. You have to sit there, you kind of sketch out all these different ideas, different angles, different ways to create all those scenes. Try to draw this very lightly because I know I'm gonna have to erase. This is a very small detail and very important detail. Yeah, it's not coming out right. This is why I thought it was important to draw extremely light. But the other challenge with this pencil is that it doesn't do well with erasers. Trying to focus on it as much as possible because I really do want to capture that expression. even though it's so small. And I even noticed that he did really thin lines on the cheeks as well, just to give it more texture. I just love that dedication to it. Too bad there weren't drawing videos back then. It would have been great to see John Buscema in his element, drawing out each panel. I mentioned this in the previous stream of Drawn Comics. There is one that I believe shows a very short period of time of him drawing something, which is this book that is very popular. It's called Drawing Comics the Marvel Way, and it has John Buscema there, along with Stan Lee. Who, by the way, chewed John Buscema out for one of the most greatest issues that he's done, which was on Silver Surfer. So the story goes that it was received well, it was drawn excellent, and maybe at some point in the future I'll show you guys that I have those issues as well. Yeah, and when Stan Lee saw it, he just went into a fit and started ripping pages out. Literally, his work. Like this guy, John Buscema, who's been working with him, who built up the fame and, you know, the reputation of all these characters and such, was getting like all of his work ripped out. And then later on, supposedly, Stan Lee called and said that, you know, that piece of work was one of the best that's been out there. And then John Buscema was like, what are you talking about? You ripped out all those pages. And Stan Lee was like, I don't remember doing that. So it's just a bummer to hear that kind of story. He deserves way more credit than that's out there, actually. Like, there isn't really that much. There isn't really that much about him. And when I was making that video about John Buscema in the first episode of Drawing Comics. Yeah, there weren't that many photos to work off of. It's a very limited amount of photos, despite him having so much work put out there for Conan the Barbarian, pretty much drawing every single Marvel title character out there. Not that many photos of him, or like much about his life. And he wasn't just like a fill-in artist. Like he followed right after Jack Kirby. And it was like the beginning stages of a lot of these characters. So his contribution was huge in the Marvel Universe. And I hope more comic book companies and do the opposite of that and actually really pay tribute to their artists that shape these comic book companies. I mean, it's not about the writers only, otherwise it would just be a novel, right? That's the difference between comics and novels, is that comics are image oriented for the most part, as opposed to novels, which are just purely about the story. I am jumping into detail when I should be focusing more on building out the rest of the drawing. Made a little mistake there. As in, if you notice the elbow and how close it is to the end of the frame, that space here is a little too wide. But trying to see if maybe shifting him over just a little bit would really damage the drawing. You're gonna have to do some heavy erasing there. I'm not gonna be changing Conan, that's for sure. I like how this turned out. Should I do it? Should I shift everything over? Well, not everything, but let's just say this Hulk brute. I'm gonna go with yes. I'm gonna just do it. Just do it. It could also be just that the panel is way too wide. It's not necessarily that I didn't get the proportions right. But I'm going to avoid the mistake. I'm going to sketch everything out. No, it's not going to work. As much as I'd like to stick to the original, it's just not going to come out right because the rest of the body is going to be like way too wide. Bummer. That's alright. So just a perfect example of actually how beneficial it is to just sketch out everything. Now this time around, the leg came out better. And notice how it started out with like a basic shape, kind of. And slowly transitioned into more detail. I mean, the gap isn't too bad, but I'm really making excuses. I could have done better. And sketching everything out in the beginning. It's a bad habit. And I kind of drift into thought, and then I just realized, like, whoops, I just did a lot of detail on just one part of the drawing when I should have had everything else down before jumping into it. I started laying the bricks before making sure all the beams are set, all the parameters are set. But despite that error, it's not coming out awful. I'll just say that. It's not so off where the anatomy is off, the figures are off. It's just slightly shifted. The real problem is that I avoided sketching everything out first. That's the biggest problem. It's not so much the results, it's how I got them. A bad habit. I do want to get his face in. I think by the time I finish the face, I'm gonna have to call it quits for drawing comics of the day, ladies and gents. But don't fret, I will be back later on today at 8 p.m. to continue on with my project stream. And I'm pretty excited about it. I worked on it more last night. It's coming closer and closer to being finished. So I'm pretty happy to share that with you guys, as well as finishing it up. It's the icing on a cake stage of the drawing, where it's just like fixing little things here and there, and it's no longer wrestling with likeness and the face. Like, I'm pretty happy with the results I got drawing the face. Finally. way too big eyes. Those eyes, those peepers, are way too big. Also need to give him a little bit more of a dramatic angle to make it look like he's furrowing his brow. I gave him really big elbows because I was like, let me see if I could get closer to the frame. That way. And the answer is no. Big resounding no. I'm actually surprised, you know, there's like a festival that's going on right outside my place, or like close to it. And I'm glad it's not loud enough to actually interfere with the stream. I thought you guys would have to hear that as well today. In which case I probably would have had to postpone it. So I believe this is gonna be the end of the stream, y'all. Thanks for tuning in. I will be back at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard for the project stream, as I mentioned earlier, so make sure you check that out to see the progress and to come and hang out at the Art Lounge. So thanks again, y'all. I'll see you at 8 p.m.